Have you ever stood in the middle of something that felt like a detour and only later realized it was actually the path all along? That's a little of what Genesis 10 and 11 feel like. On the surface, these chapters can feel like a pause in the story, a list of names, a tower, a strange moment of confusion and scattering. But take a breath before you read, because something important is happening here, something that will matter far more than it first appears. We're still in the very early pages of the human story. The flood waters have receded. Noah's family has stepped off the ark and onto dry ground. God has made a covenant, painted the sky with a rainbow, and said, "I will not destroy the earth this way again." And now, humanity begins again. Genesis 10, often called the Table of Nations, is essentially a family map. It traces the descendants of Noah's three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and shows how the earth began to fill with people, languages, and nations. It can feel like a long list of unfamiliar names, and in some ways, it is. But here's what's worth noticing. This is a whole world being born. Every name represents a family, a place, a people group. What looks like dry genealogy is actually a portrait of God's original design, that the earth would be full of image bearers, spreading out across every corner of creation. Then comes Genesis 11, and everything shifts. The story of Babel is one of the most well-known in all of Scripture, and also one of the most misunderstood. Here's what happens. Humanity, now sharing one language, gathers together and makes a decision. Let us build a city. Let us build a tower that reaches to the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves. And God scatters them. It's easy to read this as punishment, as God being threatened or angry or distant. But maybe, just maybe, there's something more tender happening here. You might notice that what the people were building wasn't just a tower. It was a declaration. We don't need to scatter. We don't need to fill the earth like God told us to. We can stay right here and make ourselves great. They were building security out of their own strength, their own unity, their own name. And perhaps one of the things worth sitting with is this. God's response wasn't simply consequence. It may have been correction toward purpose. What God had always intended was for humanity to spread, to carry his image to the ends of the earth. The people of Babel were, in a sense, holding that image in one place and refusing to let it move. Could it be that the scattering, as disorienting as it sounds, was actually an act of grace? Here's something that often gets overlooked. Genesis 10 lists all the nations and languages before the Tower of Babel story in Genesis 11, which means, scholars suggest, that Genesis 11 may be filling in the how, explaining what caused that spread of nations we already read about. The Bible often works this way. It gives you the big picture, then zooms in. And when you zoom in on Babel, you find something deeply human, the desire to be seen, to matter, to build something lasting with our own hands. Let us make a name for ourselves. You might recognize that feeling. Most of us do. We build our own versions of towers, careers, reputations, relationships, routines, all in an effort to feel secure, to feel known, to feel like we won't be forgotten. What if the AHHA moment in Babel isn't just about pride, but about misplaced longing? A longing for significance that was always meant to be found in God, not built by human hands. These two chapters are a transition, a hinge point. The story of all humanity is giving way to the story of one man. After the scattering at Babel, the camera slowly zooms in, past the nations, past the family lines, past the noise of a confused and scattered world, until it lands on a single name in a genealogy. Abram. We don't know it yet, but everything is about to change. The rest of Genesis, and in many ways, the rest of the entire Bible, grows out of what God is about to do through this one unlikely person. So as you read Genesis 10 and 11, you don't need to memorize the names. You don't need to map every descendant. Just notice the scope of it, the breadth of a world full of people, the very human moment at Babel, and the quiet, steady movement of a God who is not deterred, not defeated, and not done. He's setting something in motion. Before you read, take a moment to consider. Is there any area of your own life where you've been building for your own name, your own security, rather than trusting God's direction? And perhaps even more gently, what might it look like to release that and let Him scatter you somewhere beautiful? The world at the end of Genesis 11 looks fragmented, confused, scattered in every direction, but God is not confused. He knows exactly where every person is going, and He already has a plan. Go ahead and read, and watch for the moment the story narrows, because when it does, it will open into something extraordinary.